Dr. Tom Hazuka was a Peace Corps volunteer in Chile from 1978 to 1980 during the Pinochet dictatorship, which began with a violent military overthrow of the elected government on September 11, 1973. If You Turn to Look Back chronicles his return to Chile after 9/11 and the changes in the author and the world he once knew. Hazuka retired after years of teaching at Central Connecticut State University. Tom lives in Sebastian, Florida, and Berlin, Connecticut.
Hey folks, thanks for showing up. I thought that when I was preparing for this, try not to smirk too much, Gil, when you hear me say that I was preparing for something. But really, I did. And by prepare, I meant I was looking through it to just find a section that would work pretty well to read. And I started one, and I said, oh, that's a pretty good section. And after, I don't know, a couple of minutes, I was choking up, and I said, can't read that section. And I tried a few more. And it was about the fourth or fifth section that I tried before I said, I'm pretty sure I can get through this one without choking up. So this is a section that you're going to hear. And it's about I made 4 different trips to this place up in the Altiplano from Arica, Chile, which is in northern Chile, just a tad south of the Peruvian border in the desert. And I lived there for the better part of 2 years in the Peace Corps. So this, If You Turn to Look Back, is a Peace Corps memoir, but that's actually a lousy way of putting it. It's a memoir of returning to the place where I was in the Peace Corps 23 years after I had left. And there were a couple reasons for going back. One was that it was, I would imagine that virtually every Peace Corps volunteer thinks, one of these days I'll go back and check it out again, why not? Well, but this was right after 9/11. And I received an email from a friend, a Chilean friend, on September 12th. And it had in the subject line, "We are in pain." So I couldn't read that part. And anyway, he had found out, I must have told him, that my wife Christina and I had gone to visit friends in Brazil that year. And he emailed me and said, "You went to Brazil and you didn't come here?" And part of me says, well, it's pretty far from Brazil to Arica. So no, I didn't have the time to do that. I was still working, had to get back, to school. But anyway, I said, okay, the next year, have to go see Hugo in Arica, Chile. So that's a quick geographic bit of background. And then Arica's right on the coast, so the Pacific's right there to the west. And in 4 hours, you can drive straight up into the Andes and be at 14,000 feet. And so my friend, fellow Peace Corps volunteer, Mike Welsh, was in town. He was just traveling around, stayed with me for a while. And we said, let's go up. I'd never been up there before. So we rented a car, a red VW bus. Bug. Bus would have been so much hippier. No, it was just a Bug. And we headed up. And we're going to have a great time. And so this is in the middle. We're getting up there. We're probably at about 10,000 feet or something like that. Is that enough of a... probably. Altiplano means high plain. We knew that. But knowing what words mean and what they mean can be two different animals. Our romantic vision had been to camp in God's country, to build a blazing fire from wind-gnarled deadwood and sleep like nomads beneath the infinite stars. As we reached the highest plateaus and the road leveled off, we saw snow-capped volcanoes, scrub brush, and miles of wild, primal emptiness, but not a single stick of firewood. In our, mostly my, ignorance, we had failed to realize that the Altiplano lies far above the tree line. If there were a tree line, because trees don't generally grow in a desert. Somehow these basic bits of reality had escaped me, and so had appropriate footwear. I'd forgotten to bring boots, so had only my sandals from sunny Arica, fortunately reinforced by 2 pairs of socks from my pack. When we reached the Chukuyo control, that's just the checkpoint, darkness had set in, bringing body-numbing temperatures. Camping was out of the question. A desert always cools off at night. A desert 14,000 feet above sea level gets seriously cold. Dangerously cold if you're an idiot and not prepared for it. At Chukuyo, in the middle of Chile's Lauca National Park, the police hut was toasty warm from a potbelly stove. My driver's license passed inspection again. Oh, that's from an earlier pod. I had an expired Connecticut driver's license to rent the car and to get through an earlier checkpoint. Now, let's kind of looked at it. My driver's license passed inspection again, and we were free to move on, but hoped we wouldn't have to. We explained our situation, freely admitting to screwing up, rubbed our hands briskly at the stove. We asked about a hotel in the area, and they just laughed. Come on, we thought, have a heart and offer to let us stay here. Put us in a cell for all we care. Cells have beds, right? But the Pacos, that's Chilean slang for Carabinero, the military police force. But the Pacos took neither hint nor pity. The closest they came to helping us was to suggest we try Parinacota. Parinacota? It's up the road, one said with a vague wave toward the east. Take a left. How far? No sé, just up the road. Gracias, I said, silently cursing the bastards. What was easier, offering hospitality now or searching for 2 frozen bodies tomorrow? We traded the gravel parking lot for the gravel road and poked along through the darkness, fearful of missing the sign to Parinacota, if there even was a sign. Our high beams were a meager glimmer in the endless Altiplano night. The sign for Parinacota was weathered, small, crooked, and extremely welcome. We turned and bounced north on the narrow, twisting dirt road. The second bottle of wine, because we had drunk one earlier, the second bottle of wine sat corked tight in the back seat, untouched for at least an hour. Slow kilometers dragged by, 2, 3. Despite the sign, we began to worry. Where was this place? Mike braked hard. A puddle 10 feet wide covered a low section of the road. I got out to see if we could drive around. No chance. Ditch to the left, rocks to the right. No stick to check the depth of the water. What do you think? I asked, rubbing my hands against the chill. What the hell? Those cops will come rescue us, right? I walked to the other side of the water, shivering in the wind. Mike gunned the engine and splashed right through. Sometimes anticlimax can be a very good thing. We crawled along, dodging some holes and rocks, thumping over others. It was more a trail than a road. Suddenly, Mike braked again. A dozen or more llamas blocked the way. They were obviously domesticated with colored yarn tied at their ears, either a form of branding or some sort of fashion statement. They didn't scatter at the sight of us. We tried to nudge through them and they grudgingly cooperated. Then 2 herders appeared in the headlights, squat indigenous men wearing sandals with no socks. I couldn't believe it. I'd have had frostbite within an hour. Excuse me, señores, is this the road to Parinacota? Sí. Is it far? No. How far, I asked. 1 kilometro, 2. Their broad faces were barely visible in the night. They kept a good 10 feet between them and the car. 2 kilometros, one said, his voice like a shrug. They followed their animals. We drove 2 slow kilometers, then 3, 4. The town was a sudden surprise in the high beams. Bienvenidos a Parinacota was painted in large white capital letters on a cinder block wall. We followed the trail around a few white stucco buildings with tin roofs and stopped in a dirt plaza. Not a single light shone in the tiny village. The last thing we saw before turning off our lights was a white wall surrounding an old church with a thatched roof. People began to materialize from the darkness. None of them spoke. A silent, spooky semicircle formed around the car. I wasn't exactly scared, just intensely aware of being an outsider, an intruder in someone else's world. Mike and I shared a glance, then rolled down our windows. Buenas noches, I said. Hay un hotel aquí. Just asking if there's a hotel. There wasn't. Parinacota was a town of maybe 50 souls, far off the beaten path, whose path itself was beat. Our only hope was that an altruist or entrepreneur would take us in for the night, an impromptu altiplano B&B. You can stay with me, a slight young man said. I have another guest, so cannot offer you a bed, but if the floor is acceptable, you're welcome. Two freezing gringo beggars were in no position to be choosy. We got our sleeping bags in packs, then despite qualms of being perceived as ugly Americans, did the smart thing and locked the car. The man carried a lantern. Cortaron la luz. The electricity's out. It actually means they shut off the electricity. He told us he was the village school teacher. I asked if he was from Parinacota, and he shook his head sadly. At least it seemed sad to me. Maybe he drew some sort of hazardous duty pay for this hinterland assignment. It was a half-minute walk to his house, which consisted of one fairly large rectangular room. Feeble light from the lantern barely reached the corners. Two metal-framed twin beds jutted out from the wall opposite the door. On the closer bed sat a man around 65 years old, wearing a black coat and round gold-rimmed glasses. He stood up as we entered, though he didn't smile. The teacher introduced us, saying his guest was originally from Germany, and we shook hands. I don't remember the man's name, but for convenience, we'll call him Schaffner, the name I gave the character in my short story Altiplano, a fictionalized account of this trip. So, Mike asked in Spanish, how long have you been in Chile? The man stared at him an instant. Over 30 years, he said. A strange little pause ensued. I'm not sure that it was awkward, but it was definitely strange. The year was 1979. It didn't take a genius to calculate that Schaffner had come to Chile shortly after World War II, along with numerous other Germans, many of them Nazis. The four of us talked before extinguishing the lantern. Schaffner spoke excellent Spanish, though with a heavy German accent. The conversation turned to politics, as conversations often did in Chile at that time. Mike and I danced around the topic. Prudent behavior under a military dictatorship, especially when you were in some lost corner of the world, halfway disappeared already. So that's a reference. This is during the Pinochet dictatorship in Chile. And the disappeared references to the desaparecidos, all the the many people who just were never seen again after the September 11th, 1973 coup, golpe de Estado. We didn't know these people, or if we could trust them. Before long, Schaffner spoke glowingly of Pinochet, then talked of Adolfo Hitler, how he had made mistakes, sure, but the people respected him and the trains ran on time, not like here in goddamn South America. Even today, remembering that man makes my stomach squirm. I'll take a little pause here. I'll get rid of the squirming. We crawled into our sleeping bags fully clothed. The wooden floor was grimy and hard, and something unexpected came as a side effect of the altitude. Earth's atmosphere is thin at 14,000 feet. Time and again, I would nearly drift off, breathing, getting shallow, slowing as I slipped towards sleep. Then suddenly I'd have to gulp for air, fighting for oxygen like a bass in the bottom of a boat. It was frustrating, even scary. I eventually dropped off to spotty sleep, but it was a restless, uncomfortable night. Mike and I woke early, sore and weary. The teacher put a kettle on the stove. Warm liquid would have been wonderful, but despite the usual incredible Chilean hospitality, he didn't invite us to share bread and coffee with him and the Nazi. You know, I didn't intend that line to be funny, but it's kind of funny, isn't it? No breakfast for you. Bread and coffee with him and the Nazi. Okay. We said thanks and goodbye and stowed our sleeping bags, smeared with dirt from that foul floor, in the back seat. Time to ball the jack to fabled Lago Chungara, the highest lake on Earth, with its primeval volcanoes and famous pink flamingos. I turned the key, ready for adventure. What I got instead was the groan of a car in pain. The bug had been spoiled by easy duty at sea level in the eternal spring of Arica. Its puny engine was no match for the cold and the altitude. It had done the mechanical equivalent of curling into the fetal position. Mike pushed while I popped the clutch, but that was as hopeless as using the key. The only choice was to wait for the sun. We raised the hood to expose the motor, located in the back where the trunk usually is. A few locals had paid minimal attention during our jump start attempts, but now kids began to gather around us. 1 or 2, then 4, 5, half a dozen. In a village this small and remote, a pair of tousled gringos and a wounded VW were decent entertainment on a Friday morning. 2 boys huddled near the engine, pointing to parts and pretending they knew what they were talking about. To my surprise, these indigenous kids all wore store-bought clothes. Corduroy pants or blue jeans, machine-made sweaters and hats, the girls in skirts over trousers or tights. I'd expected to see handmade stuff that tourists, including me, buy, alpaca hats and sweaters and such. Maybe those items didn't last as long as store-bought ones, or fetched good prices in Arica's market, so made more sense to sell than to wear, or were only used on special occasions. Maybe the old ways of self-sufficiency were simply gone, like almost everywhere else, and no one in Parinacota knew how to make the clothes anymore, outside of a few old women wearing ancient patterned sweaters they had knitted, who shook their heads, chewed their coca leaves, and wondered aloud what the world was coming to. Though for all I knew, those women were already dead, or sick of knitting and ready to welcome the fruits of mass production as a godsend. One boy was rolling a wheel with a stick over the uneven ground. Didn't American kids used to do that back in the 1890s or the presidency of Teddy Roosevelt? I remembered reading about it in Booth Tarkington's novel Penrod, or maybe it was just the drawing on the cover of the paperback. When I asked if I could give it a shot, the boy smiled and handed over the implement. Soon the whole group was laughing, no one harder than Mike, as I botched try after try. That damn wheel kept wanting to flop sideways and become one with the earth. I'd need a lot of practice to learn this useless skill. Come on, Slick, I said to Mike in English, show us your game. You probably grew up doing this on the mean streets of Queens. First things first. He turned the key and the engine blessedly coughed to life. I'd like to school you, chump, but the flamingos are waiting. Don't violate any of them or I'll alert the Pacos. I grinned and closed the hood. We waved to the kids and bounced back toward the main road. Inside half an hour, we were at sky blue Lake Chungara, where hundreds of pink flamingos dotted the water. And I photographed the perfect cone of Parinacota volcano and its reflection in the placid lake. We wished we could stay for a few hours, but had to return the car and get charged an extra day. We made good time on the mostly downhill run, coasting for miles with the engine off to save fuel. Running out of gas up there would have been a severe bummer. Mike decided to get a flat tire instead. An hour outside of Pocon, Chile, he started swerving, and we heard the thumping rim. We tried to put on the spare, but of course the jack didn't work. There was nothing to do but wait. Eventually, 3 soldiers in a camouflaged truck pulled over, and with the help of their strong backs, we changed the tire. It made me remember that, despite my disdain for Pinochet and the dictatorship, most low-ranking soldiers were just ordinary guys putting in their mandatory 2 years of military service. And even if those 3 men were pro-Pinochet to the core, at that moment I felt nothing toward them but gratitude. Okay, Gil, how am I doing for time? I, of course, don't know.
Yeah, you're 16, 17 minutes.
Okay. Well, then I will finish this chapter. This is what's known as a contrast in the business. I'll skip. Maybe I'll read this too. During my Peace Corps years, I made 2 other trips up to what Aricans called El Interior, under varying circumstances, yet with one common element. I was young. The next time I went, 24 years had melted away. Period. Somehow I had become 47, a college professor, a middle-class American with a mortgage, credit cards, and most important, a wife, a stepdaughter, and a granddaughter. Despite being decades removed from the Peace Corps, though, I still felt like that kid who had spent nearly 3 years in South America, questing for adventure to postpone the rest of his life. The expected part, the acquiescence to comfortable, pleasant, middle-class America. The problem, of course, or at least the distinction, is that no matter how connected I feel to him, I'm not that kid anymore. I returned to the Altiplano not in a VW Beetle with an expired license and a bottle of wine, but in a tour bus with my wife, Christine, Panchi, Juan Marcos, they're kids from the family where I was staying, and 21 other travelers, only a handful of them Chilean. There are no misguided plans to rough it in the wilderness. This is strictly a day trip, with a driver and a pleasant guide named Jorge, a structured itinerary, and no decisions to make except what food to order or which souvenirs to buy. I'm not usually a fan of tours, but because of the us-them dichotomy they can create, a herd of Americans or Japanese or Germans or whoever steps from a bus, swarms a place, and overwhelms it for a few minutes or an hour, sticking with their own kind, speaking their own language, which of course the tour guide does as well, only dealing with local people if they deal with them at all, as sources of cheap souvenirs. I almost added, and cheap food, but these tourists likely avoid the native fare out of squeamishness and fear of the unknown. Better to wait for a good old reliable burger or T-bone back at the Hilton. In contrast, the 25 passengers on our Altiplano bus are from Chile, the US, Germany, South Korea, Australia, Peru, France, Japan, and Ecuador. 21 people. None of us knew, Christine and I were the only 2 Americans. None of us knew we'd have such an international group, but no one is surprised or scandalized either. Everyone enjoys the exotic mix. This is a collection of people traveling solo or in pairs, after all, not as part of a package tour collective. The sort of person for whom meeting foreigners different from yourself is fascinating, not threatening. Rather than isolating us among our own kind, this tour shows that our own kind is human beings, regardless of facial features, skin color, language, or birthplace. Jorge speaks Spanish and a little English, and the passengers help each other with translations. We retrace the route Mike and I took 24 years ago up the Utah Valley. The police checkpoint in Pocón, Chile is gone, maybe a sign of decreased military control over the people now that the dictatorship is history. Or possibly a sign of globalization and increased traffic between Chile and Bolivia, especially with the highway paved all the way to La Paz. The Arica-La Paz Railroad, which I rode in 1979 and which used to be the primary link between the 2 cities, after more than a century of service, no longer carries passengers, a victim of the good road and consequent cheap bus service. Excuse me. Forgot my Claritin this morning. Hate when that happens. Pocón, Chile's colonial church is in ruins, hammered by the 1987 earthquake that severely damaged Arica. The building is little more than a shell. Roof gone, west wall collapsed. Nearby, thousands of adobe bricks are stacked 3 and 4 high, waiting for reconstruction to begin. 4 bricks high might not sound like much, but instead of typical bricks, these are nearly 2 by 3 foot slabs, 6 to 8 inches thick. I see no sign of rebar or other reinforcing elements, so I fear that someday a temblor will drop the new church as well. I can only hope I'm wrong. The desert cemetery behind the church is still there, and life being what it is, of course it has stretched its boundaries. There's a bit more color than in 1979. Plastic flowers here and there, more crosses painted white instead of just bare brown, weathered wood. Unlike epitaphs carved in stone, which memorialize people long after memory of them is gone, inscriptions on wooden crosses are erased within a few seasons, the dearly departed rendered anonymous, no one and everyone. The bus climbs the Quebrada de Cardones, quickly leaving sea level behind and entering the mountain world. Jorge points out sights and passes along information. Yeah. For example, candelabra cactus, I guess candelabra cactus is the name of the branching cacti Mike and I had seen, and they exist nowhere else on the planet. I'm not sure I believe Jorge on that claim. Somewhere along the route, we stop at the bottom of a gradual incline. The driver puts the bus in neutral, kills the engine, and slowly, eerily, we begin to roll in reverse back up the hill. A weird sensation. I don't pretend to understand it, and God knows how anyone ever figured it out. But a strong magnetic field in that spot somehow causes the phenomenon. If I had only known to pull that one on Mike, complete with tales of Inca legends, bloodthirsty brujos, and the curse of the conquistadores. Sometimes a guide does come in handy. Okay, this goes on longer than I have time for. That's kind of a crappy place to stop. So I will just skip ahead to the very end of this. I assume I have, 2-3 minutes or so? Back in town at Arica. I had missed America's 200th birthday, at least the whiz-bang part. I was in Europe for my junior year in college, and by the time I returned to the U.S. on July 31st, 1976, the fireworks were over, though patriotic commercialism was still in full swing. On the 4th of July, a number of us Americans had gone to the Café de Chemin de Fer, our favorite bar in Freiburg, Switzerland. A Swiss guy played a record of Jimi Hendrix wailing the Star-Spangled Banner, and people of various nations stood and raised their glasses in grinning salute. Someone put on the Beatles' Birthday. I felt like part of something worthwhile, part of a wide, wonderful world that just might find a way to fix itself. In September of 1985, I went back to Europe and spent a day in Freiburg with my then-girlfriend Diane Hargrove. I tried to take her to the Chemin de Fer, psyched for une canette, a half-liter mug of local Cardinal beer. But I couldn't find the place. We searched a few blocks around in case my memory was dim after 9 years. Finally, I asked a pedestrian. "Oh yes," he said, "the Chemin de Fer was right here. They tore it down a few weeks ago." And I'm going to read the very short footnote that I found out later. Well, read the footnote, don't tell them. I found out years later that a bank was built on the site. Tell me that's not stereotypically Swiss. Get rid of the bar, build a bank. There had been snow during our winter in Europe despite a drought. At the Innsbruck Olympics, Greg Abel and I stood in snow to watch Rosie Mittermeier win the women's downhill, and climbed into snowy woods to the ski jump ramp to see and hear they rumble down the slope, then actually whistle when they rocket into the air, which is true. The jumpers launched themselves. "Ooh, des cailloux," cried a woman at Switzerland's Lac Noir as she skied over pebbles on a bare patch in the snow. The day Teddy, Theodosia Price, and I hitchhiked to join our friends in a Swiss chalet for Christmas, fresh snow and ice shimmered like jewels on naked trees in the mist, so beautiful we could hardly stand it. Outside my Connecticut window as I write this, 8 inches of snow dazzle in the sunshine, fighting a hopeless battle to the death. Tomorrow is the first day of spring. After all my nostalgic musings about the snows of yesteryear, which is what this chapter is called, right now, I just want the snow of today to lose the fight and disappear. Thanks a lot.
Okay, questions?
I'm always
Yes, ma'am.
fascinated when you do memoir, how much did you weigh yourself down with what's in it for the reader, and how much did you free yourself from that and just write your book?
I didn't think about the reader all that much at all till third or fourth draft in.
That's cool.
You
And so
know-
why was that important to you?
I just thought I had some damn good material. And I had to try to I was just worried on structuring it. I wasn't sure, and I eventually came up with a structure it's an A-B structure. Present tense in Chile when Chris and I went back, and then past tense stuff that happened
I see.
during
And
Peace Corps
so
time.
then you said by the third or fourth draft, you started to worry about that. What did that look like for you?
Worry is too strong a word.
that?
I started to think about that.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of it was mostly just in the sense of, like when I filled you guys in on Siberia, you know, it's second nature to me. I know it. It's like somebody writing about whatever the field, knitting.
Right.
And they, you know, if there's a bunch of knitters, you don't have to give all this information. I won't know what you're talking about. You got to give me some background about knitting.
Like the context on the German guy.
Yeah.
Like, don't you know a lot of them went to Latin America?
Yeah, and even you know, Pinochet. I mean, young Chileans. Chile is a largely young country now. I mean, well, I don't know what the figure is now. It's probably like 80% or more are they were born after Pinochet was out of power, so that's not part of their world. And so it's like, oh, he's this guy in the history books. We don't worry about that stuff now. So yeah, so it was mostly that. I did have the, I guess you can call it confidence. I had the confidence that this is interesting stuff, and if you don't think it's interesting, then I guess you won't keep reading. But I think lots of people with, and so I'm writing it for you guys. Sure.
Okay. So you live this, then in another book you fictionalize it.
Just a story, just a short story.
Okay.
Oh, no, sorry. I thought you were talking about, no, in a short story and a book. Yes, a novel.
Then you return to the same material in nonfiction. How does that, how do you forget, if you will, the stuff that you fictionalized?
Oh, no, I was pretty sure. In my real life, I forget. I mix up what happened and what didn't happen, and I'm not sure what, you know, quote unquote, really happened. But it really wasn't much of a problem. I had my journals to rely on. I had 6 or 7 journals, and to be honest, I don't know how anybody writes a memoir from. I don't know how they do it if they don't have journals. I suppose they have a half decent. I used to have a very good memory. I simply could not have written this without the journals. There's no chance. It would have been a completely different book with a whole bunch of, I don't know.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, because I really tried to get as many, sometimes just facts, concrete information. Some of the stuff I had to look up. Like I knew that this is what we got as our Peace Corps wages at this time, but I can't remember if I knew it. See, this is what in my real life. I can't remember if I looked it up or if I knew this, that our self-abnegating Peace Corps wage of, I'm trying to remember what it was, I think it was like $250 a month. And a whole bunch of my friends just said, how do you live on $250 a month? And so you know where that puts me? It puts me at about the 40th percentile of Chilean wage earners. And we're on our own. We don't have, this is counting people with families and, everything. And the empleo minimo, the minimum employment plan that Pinochet put in, sorry, I get very cynical when it comes to that guy. He couldn't have done it to help people out, because, not much anyway, because you worked a job and you got paid something like $60 a month. You couldn't come close to living on $60 a month. But you know what it did? It allowed him to take a bunch of people off the unemployment rolls. Hey, so we only have 16% unemployment instead of the real 30% or whatever it was. God knows how many people I met who used to be professionals and lost their jobs either because of politics or one thing or another, and now they're driving taxis. And making enough to scrape by, but not the way it used to, not the way it used to be. And when you go to this was just there were these guys that would hang out on the street. There were 3 or 4 of them. They sold the jewelry and stuff they made. I should have worn my belt. They would hand tool, sandals, belt, and I would buy stuff from them because I thought it was cool and I wanted to help them out. Well, one of them, and he was from Santiago. He was an educated person. His wife was an educated person. But I don't really remember the whole story. And I think they came from fairly well-to-do families. But they were completely estranged from them now, and probably because of politics. I just don't remember the details. And it's not in the book anywhere. They invited me over to they call it onces, like tea. And I got to their house. It was in a very poor part of the city. It had a dirt floor. I wasn't ready for that. that they were that hard scrabble. And the first thing he did when I walked in, he said, he apologized for the pobreza de mi casa, for the poverty of my house. And I was like, oh, Jesus. And then I ate their bread and tea. I don't even know if I brought anything over, but I felt, like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna eat your food now. But of course they would have it no other way, which is true of lots of poor people the world over. But a lot of the rich folks, wouldn't give you a damn thing.
On that note, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
So good to have that.